Conservative commentator Candace Owens is no stranger to making very interesting remarks.
And I said to him, listen, I'm not a flat earther. I'm not a round earther. Actually, what I am is I am somebody who has left the cult of science. I have left the mega church of science because what I have now realized is that science, what it is actually, if you think about it, is a pagan faith.
It's hard to respond to something like this, and I think that's the point. Candace Owens thrives on making statements that blur the line between sincerity and provocation. The goal isn't just to challenge mainstream thought, it's to frame any response as either pedantic or hysterical. She wants the critic to take the obvious bait. She wants someone like me to come along and say that she is creating content with the fruits of scientific progress. Then she can dismiss me as unreasonable by saying that I blindly believe in science just because some things work. But that argument sidesteps the real claim she's making. She didn't just say that science can be wrong. Everyone agrees on that. She said that science is a pagan faith. Coming from a practicing Catholic, these are strong words. The implication here is that science is not just flawed in practice, but is corrupt at its very foundation. It is beyond fixing because it was broken from the start. This kind of rhetoric is part of a broader push to undermine trust in institutions, especially those that rely on expertise and evidence. Because once you convince people that your opponents aren't just mistaken, but actually evil, it becomes much easier to dismiss them outright. Which somehow brings us to dinosaurs.
I was just walking with Savannah, my manager,
Yeah.
because we do like these little evening walks, and I just looked up to her and I was like, dinosaurs, that seems pretty fake and gay.
So, what's the deal here? What exactly makes dinosaurs both fake and homosexual?
What on earth? You rawr. I'm like, it's funny because people will literally say they don't believe in God, but then tell them like dinosaurs aren't real and they fall apart. Like, I'm like, okay, so they're just roaming the planet. And I was like, that's really interesting. But then because I got into and very much subscribe and believe and know to be true that there is a Christ conspiracy that's happening right now, which is the intentional removal of Christ because they want people not to believe in God, but instead to believe in humans. Well, that is what evolutionary theory was about.
At this point, the real argument has come into focus. Her issue isn't with dinosaurs per se, but rather with what they represent, a worldview she fundamentally rejects. Candace introduces the idea of the Christ conspiracy, the belief that secularists have long worked to erase belief in God altogether. In this framework, evolution wasn't discovered as the result of real-world observations, but was instead deliberately constructed as a tool of secular propaganda, solely to justify atheism. Dinosaurs become a vehicle for this agenda, priming people to accept evolutionary ideas. When she claims that questioning dinosaurs makes atheists fall apart, there's a hidden subtext. She isn't suggesting that atheists are simply offended on evidential grounds. Rather, she's arguing that questioning science itself threatens the entire foundation of the atheistic worldview, a worldview she has repeatedly described as a pagan faith. Normally, I would hesitate to call someone a full-on science denier, but in Candace's case, I think it's a fair statement. She doesn't just reject certain scientific claims. She casts the entire enterprise as the product of spiritual warfare. Science isn't merely mistaken, it's dangerous. Candace takes this to an extreme, but this kind of thinking is far from uncommon. It reflects what is known as a presuppositionalist position, the belief that the Bible is true because it is believed to be true. The same logic applies to dinosaurs. They are fake because she believes they are fake. Instead of engaging with strong evidence from all perspectives, the tendency in this mode of thinking is to only seek evidence that reinforces an existing belief. This leads to a critical misunderstanding of what the other side is actually saying. Those who engage in this approach often assume they have a complete understanding of the issue despite having only ever pursued one side of the argument. But if someone's sole purpose is to reject an idea, how much can you really trust them to represent it accurately?
Rather than making human beings believe that they had a creator, there was no concept of a dinosaur until 1850. That's very recent, right? That's the first time they were like, we actually think that there were these reptiles that are roaming the planet. And then within that same decade, they were like dinosaur bones. And they started finding them everywhere. I'm like, okay, so nobody found this. And then like
Really?
suddenly there's entire museums. And in China, they have actually been caught manufacturing dinosaur bones many times over.
Here, Candace takes two arguments that are very different but links them together, which is why we're going to be discussing both at the same time. First, the idea that dinosaurs were conceptualized in 1850 and then fossils were, I suppose, created later in that decade. Second, the idea that the Chinese have taken the mantle of fooling the world in the present. So, let's break this down. The term Dinosauria, meaning terrible lizards, was first coined in 1842 by Sir Richard Owen. The term was created in response to the discovery of fossils that resembled reptiles but which were much larger. Accordingly, it was recognized that these terrible lizards had gone extinct in the very distant past. Fossils of Megalosaurus and Iguanodon, among others, had been discovered almost 20 years before the term Dinosauria was coined. They weren't the first dinosaur fossils ever found, but they were among the first to be recognized as being something fundamentally different than what we would have expected to find considering currently extant life on Earth. Interestingly enough, another Megalosaurus fossil was discovered all the way back in 1676. This fossil was originally interpreted as belonging to either an elephant or a giant human because those were the only templates we had that seemed to fit. As far back as 2,300 years ago, the Chinese were recording the discovery of what they termed dragon bones. As dragons have yet to be discovered, the safest bet is probably that they discovered dinosaur fossils. This would make a lot of sense considering the fact that Chinese geologic layers can be especially productive for fossils. You might find yourself wondering why dinosaur fossils weren't discovered in larger numbers much sooner. That comes down to a few factors. First, as civilizations approached industrialization, the number of mines and quarries shot up exponentially. In order to feed industry and deliver their products, other types of infrastructure had to be built. The combined effect is that humans were digging a lot more often and a lot deeper than they ever had before. Second, fossilization is an incredibly rare process. Despite the fact that many museums today are practically overflowing with fossils, they represent only a small fraction of the number of discoverable fossils. The number of discoverable fossils itself is an incredibly small fraction of all life in Earth's history. Now, let us turn to the proverbial dragon in the room. Candace Owens and many other dinosaur denialists bandy about the claim that China is a major manufacturer of fake dinosaur fossils, but we have to ask, what does that mean exactly? Candace, in particular, does not accept the existence of real dinosaur fossils at all. If there are no real dinosaur fossils anywhere, what makes the case of China so egregious? Beyond that, who are the people declaring that fossils from China are fake in the first place? That last question, by the way, has a real answer. Scientists. In 1999, Archaeoraptor was presented by National Geographic as an example of the evolutionary link between dinosaurs and birds. It turned out that Archaeoraptor was what they call a fossil chimera. Essentially, two species had been glued together by a Chinese farmer and sold on the black market as an entirely new species. But it was scientists, both Western and Chinese, who quickly determined that Archaeoraptor was not a legitimately new species. It was, however, made from actual fossils. Ironically, one of these most likely came from Microraptor, a species that is itself a real example of a transitional species somewhere between dinosaur and bird. This is just one example the dinosaur denialists will point to, but there are important notes to make at this juncture. First, fake fossils have been produced in China and sold on the black market, and every time it is paleontologists, both Western and Chinese, who detect and expose them, not conspiracy YouTubers. Secondly, this is not something in any way exclusive to China. Fake fossils can come from practically anywhere in the world. It turns out anywhere you can find fossils, there will be people trying to make new ones and pass them off as the real deal, but these are found out quite quickly because the scientific community does not sleep on new discoveries. Finally, China has been a prolific source of confirmed fossils. This is shown beautifully in the example of Archaeoraptor itself. It was the product of real dinosaur fossils being merged together. One of those fossils happened to show the exact thing National Geographic had championed Archaeoraptor as an example of, the linkage between dinosaurs and birds.
And it is the case that dinosaur bones, for whatever reason, are always just found by the paleontologists. Like, it's not like you and me walking outside. I'm like, hey, a dinosaur bone.
It is indeed quite unlikely that you will be out for a walk after a rainstorm and just stumble across a hadrosaur fossil. That is, unless your name happens to be Nathan Harushkin.
Nathan Harushkin was on this ridge in July looking for fossils, like he's done many times at the Nature Conservancy of Canada's Nodwell property at Horseshoe Canyon.
And I've been aspiring to be a paleontologist for pretty much as long as I can remember, so it's pretty amazing to finally find something real that's like big.
I just think back to, how excited I would be if I was a kid and I found a dinosaur, and I could just tell by the tone in his voice, when he said that to Dad, you need to come up here.
Candace Owens exposed something here that I mentioned already. If you have a bias that you are invested in strongly enough, you will only seek out information to confirm that bias. There are a lot of dinosaur denialists who repeat this same talking point, and all of them, to a man, are dead wrong. Nathan's find was fantastic, and I hope wherever he is, he's proud of it, but he's far from the only one. In 2021, a 4-year-old girl in the UK discovered a 220 million-year-old theropod footprint. In 2020, a 7-year-old girl in Texas found a sauropod bone behind her grandparents' house. In 2011, a construction crew in Alberta found an entire ankylosaur. I hope I'm saying that the right way. You may know it as ankylosaur, as it's called in Jurassic Park, I'm pretty sure. In fact, there are at least a few dozen finds of some significance by random people in no way related to paleontologists every single year.
They want you to believe that God isn't real, that like the theory of evolution, like you're an ape. What happened was just over time, like you used to be a little chimpanzee, but then with time, this is why you learned about theory of evolution, Homo sapien, Australopithecus, but then we were Homo erectus, and now you're a human being.
Isn't that the definition of Satanism?
Yeah.
Like to believe that like Earth is the kingdom, kind of?
Yes, and that is what these people were pushing.
In 1735, Carl Linnaeus classified humans under the genus Homo in his Systema Naturae. Homo itself was contained within the larger category of primates. This was over 100 years before Charles Darwin would release On the Origin of Species. Carl Linnaeus, it should be noted, was a Lutheran Christian. It should be further noted that the Catholic Church, the church Candace is a part of, does not deny evolution. Pope Francis is on record confirming that evolution is real. He is also not the first in Catholic hierarchy to say as much, nor has the Catholic Church writ large ever been especially anti-evolution. Evolution has not always been fully accepted in the Catholic Church, but Candace's hard anti-evolution position is at odds with proclamations of the Church on the subject. Her stance is more akin to traditional fundamentalist Protestants. She also distorts the facts in an attempt to make them sound ridiculous, and in doing so, sounds ridiculous herself to anyone that actually understands them. Yes, humans did evolve from ape-like ancestors. Yes, we are apes. No, we did not evolve from chimpanzees. They are a close relative. Our ancestry split 6 to 7 million years ago. That is a nearly unfathomable amount of time compared to the human lifespan. Evolution is not something that happens overnight, and species don't morph into new ones all of a sudden like in Pokemon games.
And so once you start to realize that Satanism is real, that these people who created everything that we view in Western society to be real believed in Satan, right? They know God's real, and yet they're convincing everyone that God isn't.
I have watched a lot of Candace Owens' videos over the years, and as far as I can tell, the primary criteria that gets you lumped in with servants of the Dark One is the heinous crime of disagreeing with Candace. She makes unsubstantiated claim after unsubstantiated claim of Satanism and never even bothers trying to back it up. This is quite obviously because there is no evidence. It is not what someone actually believes or takes part in that labels them satanic. It's what their actions, or even their very lives, mean to her. I don't know whether it's simply that Candace and people like her are incapable of understanding that other people can genuinely disagree with you on things you find obvious without being evil, or if it's all just a cynical ploy. Satanist is a generic term you can call someone to immediately discredit them in the eyes of certain types of people. It doesn't matter if you have evidence or not. The accusation itself is enough to poison the well. If you are on the receiving end of it, it will invariably turn someone against you. The actual Satanist groups that we know really exist in the world, like the Church of Satan or the Satanic Temple, make it clear that they do not believe in a literal Satan. People who do believe in a literal Satan are known by another term entirely. Christians.
And so when you speak to people that are super rational out of school, you're like, well, the evolutionary theory makes sense. So it makes sense to you that you started as a chimpanzee. Like, that's a faith, buddy. It makes sense to you. And if you say to them, like, of course you went to the moon, then you start talking about basic science, but they don't actually know. They can't talk to you about Van Allen belt. They don't know anything. It's a faith.
There is no shortage of irony in her demeaning atheists as having faith. After all, Candace's entire worldview is predicated on the idea that faith is important. In fact, there's nothing more important. It is the beginning from which everything else in her whole life follows. It is her own faith in Christ which causes her to have such a hard rejection of anything considered remotely worldly. It might not be a cynical ploy to ruthlessly slander your opponents as Satanists, but it is a cynical ploy to take something you find so important and turn it around on other people. It does serve the purpose of associating atheism with something she assumes atheists find inherently demeaning, and that is the point. The enormous contradiction between her own view of faith and how she uses it against other people makes it effectively a toothless accusation. More to the point, her assertion that science is faith-based is nonsensical on its face. I certainly cannot go and perform every scientific experiment that has ever been done, nor can I have encyclopedic knowledge of every aspect of scientific consensus. But what I can do is refer to the vast body of knowledge built up over hundreds of years that is constantly being tested and refined by people in every country all around the world every single day. Science is not mere assertion. Science is a process. There is evidence. There is statistical analysis. There is disclosure of financial contributions and conflict of interest. Bad studies are retracted. Great studies are repeated with success. And most importantly, these studies often find real usage in our day-to-day lives. One does not have to know what the Van Allen belts are to know that scientists discovered them, scientists studied them, and scientists have found ways to get through them without exposing astronauts to lethal doses of radiation. These are not calculations you have to do on your own to know they work when the whole of science points to their conclusions. Since science is a process, it is expected that scientists will make mistakes. Scientists will get things wrong. That's why the scientific community does not rely on mere opinion from individual scientists, but the result of the process as a whole. This is not the same as blindly believing something because you think it is true or because you want it to be true. Science is evidence-based.
Like, they have asserted, and what's interesting, even that, going to the moon, the Bible talks about a firmament. And if the firmament in the Bible, if you look at that, you would go, okay, well, it says that as below, so above, and this is how God created it. So if the Bible is real, which I know in my heart to be true, there's no way we got past this firmament.
We have talked a lot about Candace's hard stance on things that disagree with her faith, but maybe we should also be talking a little bit about her faith specifically. Candace takes it as a given that the Bible is true because she believes it is true. That much is established. This is something a person literally cannot argue with because, as the old saying goes, you cannot reason someone out of something they didn't reason themselves into. The problem is that, devoid of critical understanding of the Bible, her faith is essentially rootless. It bears more similarity, once more, to the fundamentalist Protestants of old in this regard. Without opening yourself up to critical scholarship on the Bible, you simply have no window into how the ancients would have perceived these scriptures, nor how that understanding changed over time, adding essential context. Because it did change. Over the course of both the Old and New Testaments, the ideas about the world and humanity and their relationships to God changed considerably. This shouldn't be that surprising of a thought because it is plainly apparent in some regards. Christians believe that all of a sudden God had an unannounced son that had only been vaguely alluded to in earlier scriptures. This might sound shocking to some ears, but anyone that has studied the New Testament to a significant extent has likely realized this already. The 12 struggled greatly with what to make of Jesus, his role, and what he was there to do. They had certain expectations set by pre-Christian traditions, and Jesus shattered many of those traditions entirely. There is a reason why Christian apologists avoid hard literalism while accepting the key tenets of the faith. William Lane Craig is a world-renowned apologist, and almost no one alive would call him a false Christian. He seems to accept evolution on at least some levels and leaves it an open question on others. He has written works that argue that Adam and Eve could be real historical figures, even within an evolutionary framework. He does not accept that the world is 6,000 years old, nor does he accept the idea that the world is flat. How could it be the case that William Lane Craig, one of the most knowledgeable and devout Christian apologists, has gotten it so wrong while still holding the Bible up as his ultimate authority in life? Simply put, he probably hasn't. He takes a modern view of the Bible based in an actual understanding of what it means. The fact that Candace can't do this or has no desire, preferring a purely belief-based understanding of the Bible, is ultimately a huge indictment on her type of faith, no matter how purely Christian she considers it to be.
But it's interesting because, once you start to realize that all of it is about countering everything that is in the Bible, right? You have a creator. No. Evolutionary theory is real, actually. What happened was a meteor hit, and I don't know, like the meteor hit and wiped out the dinosaurs, but then like the lizards came. I don't even really, when you get down to even just thinking about that, you're like, okay, so it wiped out the dinosaurs. And then what happened? They're like, well, then the amoeba was around, but then like little lizards are from that. I actually don't, I have a lot of questions. I wish I was in 6th grade again.
Ignorance should not be a point of pride, but this part serves as a poignant reminder that for some people, that's exactly what it is. Don't let that little quip about wishing she were in 6th grade again fool you. She clearly didn't listen very well the first time, so I doubt a second go would help out very much. The problem is that in order to learn, a person has to have the desire to learn. Candace displays in typically embarrassing fashion that she is totally lacking in this regard. Her sarcastic non-explanation of evolution, intended only to ridicule, makes that abundantly clear. It also points to the fact that she doesn't know what she's talking about at all. She may have heard some of these things in school, but some wires were crossed, and she is conflating things that have zero relation and happened at completely different times. If you explain something the wrong way, it is going to sound ridiculous by default. Part of this is no doubt intentional. She wants to signal her ignorance as a virtue to other people that are proud to be the same. It tells a certain type of person, you can trust me, I'm just like you, and I think we should believe her when she says she is. There are plenty of popular science books intended to remedy exactly her misconceptions, but she would probably have to read quite a few of them. Technically, she could probably knock out one a week, even with her no doubt busy schedule, but I would suggest you not hold your breath waiting for that to happen.
But it is interesting that like they kind of drop it after 2nd grade. Like they take you to the Natural History Museum and then there's no more talk about dinosaurs like later on in school. And they understand that children's minds are malleable. But when you get older, you might ask some questions. Like I would have a lot of questions now if I was sitting in 2nd grade and they were like in a great big meteor hit and then all the dinosaurs went away. I would be like, oh, okay, but then what happened?
You would think that my jaw would be on the floor well before this point, but this is the one that officially did it. I think it's important to note just how much Candace is outing herself as someone that didn't pay attention in school. We learn about dinosaurs early in school because they are fun and get otherwise apathetic and disinterested kids more into science. I mean, that's the hope anyway. It clearly didn't work for her. Second, and flowing from the first, dinosaurs do not simply cease to exist in school curricula. The discussion of dinosaurs ends up blending into larger scientific discussions. They become a feature but not the main part of studying biology and geology, among others. It's also important to remember that paleontology is an entire field of study that leads to focusing on dinosaurs as a career. Sort of. So, what do we make of this? It's a common claim in dinosaur denialist circles that dinosaurs simply stop being discussed after 2nd grade or whatever. This claim is false. The big problem is that a lot of people in America especially simply tune out and sleepwalk their way through whatever courses they have to do in order to pass a class. The work gets done, if we're being generous to Candace, but the learning process takes a back seat. When dinosaurs are just big reptiles that go roar, it's exciting and fun. When learning about the genetic linkage between dinosaurs and birds and how we know it's real and why it's important, a lot of people just tune out. Candace was one of them, and it shows. But Candace, we know what happened after the asteroid, and we would love to tell you. I would personally send you a book about it. Hell, I would come on your show and read it to you myself. Open offer.
Do you think that's the higher-ups' attempt to maybe get us used to the idea of a mass extinction event?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. And it very much empowers the fear that people have in like climate change and, well, this could happen again, or if we don't get this right. And ultimately, what are they doing? Drawing you more towards the idea that a creator is not real, but ultimate governance is real.
This seems like something of a pot versus kettle kind of moment. Here we have Candace Owens arguing that the government uses apocalyptic scenarios to keep everyone afraid and convinced that government is the solution. Somehow, this will mean that no one believes in God anymore, but let's back up. In Candace's world, almost everything is a satanic conspiracy. There is a real apocalypse coming, a catastrophic final judgment the Bible says will bathe the world in holy fire. The Bible also says that if you don't accept that Jesus died for your sins, there is another type of fire waiting for you that is much worse than all of that. If our thinking in the present day is apocalyptic, and few could argue against that, some of it almost has to originate from the apocalyptic stories that religion tells us. There is an echo of the earth being bathed in fire in the problem of climate change. That fear is there, even though with climate change it isn't quite as literal. Except in a tragic universal irony, we've done this to ourselves. That is horrible, but it says nothing of the existence of God or whether he has any role in it or not. Still, it seems perplexing for followers of a specifically apocalyptic religion to be faulting others for their own ideas of apocalypse, ideas based in disasters that are at least plausible considering how we know the universe to work. Whether or not they teach about asteroid impacts in school, the asteroids are out there. Whether or not they teach about climate change in school, the climate is changing. This whole bury your head in sand or big government will get you approach won't prevent your worst subconscious fears about the chaotic universe we live in from someday coming true. And I think that is what some of it is about. Christianity provides a story for people who are especially frightened of the world we live in. It suggests an easy duality where I am good and therefore you are evil. It suggests a day of judgment where good people like me will get eternal bliss like we deserve, and people like you will get the worst of the worst. It suggests that the only worries on this plane are of spiritual origin, and if you just do the right thing, everything will turn out right. Now, I want to be completely clear that I'm not saying Christianity is bad or wrong or false, but I am saying that using Christianity or any other religion to avoid acknowledging harsh realities about the world we live in is a bad thing.
I mean, you can't use gasoline and petrol. You're going to have to drive electric cars, you know? Well, we've got to reduce the temperature by this and by that. And you see that is a religion. And these people will call themselves atheists. And I'm like, you guys have a deeper faith than anything I've ever known.
It does not require faith to understand that scientific studies have consistently shown for a long period of time that the climate is changing because of human actions. It does not require faith to understand that scientists have shown with whole Earth climate monitoring the world is getting warmer at an increasingly rapid rate. We have developed tools to accurately measure both atmospheric carbon dioxide and the rate at which it is increasing because of human actions. There is an evidence-based consensus that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and that increasing it in the atmosphere increases heating. Faith is unsubstantiated belief. Climate science is the exact inverse. It allows us to show that we are warming the world by changing its environmental conditions through large amounts of carbon emissions. The best way to change that is to stop emitting large amounts of carbon. When we say that electric cars are a necessary adaptation to prevent climate change, we are not saying that by switching to electric cars, we will appease the climate change gods. We are not merely performing a rain dance. It is an effective measure taken on weight of scientific evidence. It will have the practical effect of decreasing carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, thus decreasing warming.
These people, when the government says mask up, save lives, let your parents die alone, they listen. They listen and they laugh at the Catholics.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you believe in the sacraments. I'm like, homie, okay, you believe in things that are so utterly absurd. I mean, during COVID, if the government had said, hop on one foot, that's the only way you're going to stay alive, you would have seen mofos. Like,
I mean, the 6 feet thing was really funny.
of course, like common sense, that just sounded stupid.
I am thrilled that Candace Owens keeps pointing to her Catholic faith as the leading light in her life. There is someone else associated with Catholicism that has strong words about this subject as well. Some groups protested, refusing to keep their distance, marching against travel restrictions, as if measures that governments must impose for the good of their people constitute some kind of political assault on autonomy or personal freedom. During COVID, governments and authorities certainly made mistakes. No one is denying that. However, these authorities were not recommending actions arbitrarily, that is to say, without reason. COVID deniers will point out that masks and social distancing were not perfect solutions. That is accurate to the extent that there is no perfect solution for a pandemic type of situation. Masks and social distancing were intended to reduce the spread, first by limiting the amount of virus particles that could escape into the air from someone who is sick, second by limiting the amount of virus particles that could be inhaled by someone who isn't yet sick, and third by assuring that larger droplets containing higher amounts of virus would fall from the air before they could reach another person. Candace Owens is hopeful that some critic will make fun of communion in order to seem biased against Catholics and Christians more broadly. She can point this out as a fundamental unfairness that backs her point about atheists and science-oriented folks being the inherent enemy. But I'm not going to downplay the significance of communion to Christians around the world. Communion is important to billions of people. It is a personal choice that the individual undertakes for spiritual purposes. That deserves to be respected. The difference between these two things is that for a non-Christian, communion serves no known purpose or function. Masks and social distancing, alongside other evidence-based responses to COVID, serve a purpose regardless of religion. One does not have to be an atheist, an agnostic, or a Satanist to take part in these measures. They work equally across the whole of humanity because they are based in knowledge of biology.
And again, it's the intuition. Can I explain why that sounds stupid in scientific terms, science, which I think has become a faith? No, I just have this intuition. I think God gives you your intuition. That's the Holy Spirit, that this is really stupid. And yet you saw people get in line. So I believe that the cult of science, the people that deem themselves atheists, have just had this terrible thing happen where they have transferred their innate faith and they've given it to ultimate government.
If I or anyone else tried to characterize Catholics as a monolithic group, we would be called out for the exercise, and rightly so, in my opinion. Suggesting that all atheists are one type of person, socialists in this case, serves a rhetorical function. By associating one group of people that Candace dislikes with another group that she dislikes, she is generating doubt against both groups of people simultaneously. There are certainly atheists who are socialist. There are also atheists who are conservative, libertarian, or even anarchist. This reality is a big problem for the association that she is trying to make. Likewise, Catholics span the ideological spectrum. There are conservatives like Candace herself, but Catholicism has a strong tradition of left-wing beliefs as well. Liberation theology, for example, is inspired by socialist political movements and yet is identifiably Catholic. Pope Francis himself was influenced by the tenets of social justice. Unlike Candace, I tend to think we should be as nuanced as possible when talking about entire groups of people. If it's wrong to be bigoted, and I think it is, then we must recognize that the essence of bigotry comes in the desire to demean entire groups of people for being different. Candace seems to understand this to some degree, but only when it refers to people that follow ideologies like that of the failed painter of Germany. You know the one.
Like, I can't say I believe that I believe that Michelle Obama is a man, because I have never seen a single shred of proof of that. What I'm saying is that rather than just dispelling everybody as crazy, I would at least like to look into it and then say, actually, I don't think she's a man.
We will come to an end starting with this digression. We have more than once seen Candace declare ignorance of fairly simple things. What happened after the extinction of the dinosaurs? Something that could be discovered in seconds with a simple Google search is instead eternally shrouded in mystery. She is incapable of understanding it, she claims, because she cannot go back to grade school and ask questions. If she doesn't have an answer to the question of whether or not Michelle Obama is trans, it is merely because she has yet to research it. Yet throughout this video, she proudly declares that she has no need for research because she believes in things. She has feelings, intuition. So what do we make of this? Candace shows a fundamental openness to narratives that challenge what she perceives as the mainstream because she believes that the mainstream is entirely built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. No question, no matter how absurd, is off the table as long as she believes it runs counter to what she has arbitrarily declared wrong and flawed. This, as I have said before, is not uncommon in modern discourse. It is, however, intellectually dishonest. There is nothing wrong with engaging the ideas of flat earthers, dinosaur denialists, or anyone else. It is not a moral failing to delve deeply into the thoughts and ideas of people you disagree with very strongly. It is, however, a failure of character to exclusively embrace a side you have arbitrarily decided is more honest. If we cannot trust, to at least some extent, the results of scientific advancement or expertise as a whole, then we are left rudderless. Our entire worldview is open to be shaped by those who are the most charismatic, the loudest, or those who make the most brazen and bold statements from a place of pure contrarianism. We will have no way of determining what is true and what is false. Everything comes down to what you believe to be the case. We are nothing more than easy prey for a host of charming charlatans and con men. This is why evidence-based approaches to the world we live in are important. They give us a guide to navigating the large amount of information that is out there. If we don't have this, we don't have anything at all. There is no such thing as truth at all. There are only feelings, and a society cannot sustain itself on basis of feelings alone, since feelings are fickle and ever-changing. Even someone like Candace, who makes an entire public persona out of the importance of her beliefs, is not so steady. Her beliefs have, as she acknowledges, changed greatly. That's not to say there's anything wrong with change. We are all wrong sometimes, and it's good to change when we have been wrong. But you cannot so easily know that you have been wrong if the very ideas of proof and evidence are seen as a conspiracy. In conclusion, we have said a whole lot about Candace Owens, but I think it's time to make the quiet part loud. Candace Owens is many things, but first and foremost, a tragedy. She is regarded by many as a sociopath or a grifter, but she is something much sadder than those things. She is a person in whom curiosity has waged a brutal war and lost. She has become a caricature of proud ignorance. Whatever was good in her has long since fallen away. What remains of Candace is not what any person should wish to be. A good book once said, "For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul?" Candace Owens is a living warning. She warns you to be careful how you respond to the world. It could leave you hollow and wanting, a pitiful thing, something with nothing at all left inside.